Hey everybody, welcome back. Happy Tuesday. Tack för sist, välkommen tillbaka. So I just had this idea pop into my head. Thought, when I was kind of contemplating, I was watching some videos here on YouTube. I was just now watching Dry Creek Wrangler. I swear I'm going to remember this guy's name one of these times. Dwayne. Shit, I don't remember. But anyway, Dwayne. I like his videos. He's very down to earth. I feel like he's the kind of guy I could hang out with and have a beer and just sit and talk and BS about random stuff. Bjorn, what's his name? Bjorn Andreas. Norwegian dude, so man after my heart. By the way, Norway won today, World Cup, their first game against Iraq. I think it was 3-1. I checked, I was working when the game was going on, so I was following it, and it was 3-1 at minute 90. I'm guessing that's probably where it ended up. And my boy Erling Haaland had 2 goals. So we're off to a good start. But what I was thinking about, I've done a bunch of videos on religion, Mormon Church, leaving the Mormon Church, my experiences in the Mormon Church, but I was thinking about, does religion, and specifically Christianity, because I haven't been part of, other religions apart from Christianity. It's all I've known. It's all I've been a part of. But does it free your mind? Or does it burden and hinder your mind? Think about that for a second. And I'm thinking about this as I go, because this just popped into my head just a few minutes ago. I'm getting ready to go to bed here pretty soon. It's almost 10 o'clock here on the West Coast, and I got to get up early and work. So I started contemplating that, and like I said, I'm thinking about this as I'm going. But as a kid, a kid should be carefree. You should be just loving life. And I know there are lots of kids that don't get to lead a life like this. I mostly did. I had a fantastic childhood. I had great parents. We had rules. Don't get me wrong. We had rules that we had to follow. We had bedtimes when we were younger. And we had to get with the program. But we were also allowed a lot of freedom, especially as we got a little older. So I had a great childhood. My whole childhood was in the Mormon Church. I've mentioned that we were living in Norway when my parents joined the church, and I was only a year old, and I wasn't even 5 when we left Norway. I did move back because I went on a Mormon mission in the 80s, so it was kind of cool to be there again. But I think about, the whole program of the church, the Mormon Church, and I think it's similar with other churches. Now they all have their own distinctions, but you're taught pretty early, that you got to repent. God's watching. And I've mentioned this before. I won't go into specifics. I try not to get graphic in these videos. And if I'm going to, I will give you a warning ahead of time, because I don't want to offend anybody. But I also want to be frank about what I talk about. And if I'm going to talk about a certain subject, I want to be able to talk about it. So this is not going to be that kind of video, but just, the urges that you have as a boy or a girl, I'm guessing too, when you're younger, and you're told that these things have to be controlled, that it's a sin to follow through on these things. That definitely weighs on a child's mind. And when I say child, I'm not necessarily talking about a 6-year-old, obviously. I'm talking about, as I was growing up, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, these things became more of a burden on my brain because it was pounded into me constantly. By the way, sidebar here, for those of you that are LDS, active LDS, I'd love to hear your comments on this, because I went to a lot of church in my life, including being on a mission. Can they not come up with something different to do in sacrament meeting? It's the same talks over and over and over again. And by the way, if you're not familiar with this, I don't know if it's been so long. I don't remember if it was once a month or once every couple of months. They have what's called the High Council comes to speak at sacrament meetings. Sacrament meeting is the main meeting for the church. That's where you take the sacrament, the water and the bread. And there's speakers. There's usually 2 speakers, sometimes a youth speaker starts it out. And when the High Council would come, now, I don't mean to offend anybody, but anybody that grew up in the church will say this, at least anybody I've ever known. They call them dry council because the speeches, the talks were so freaking boring. And it's like, after a while, you just hear the same thing over and over and over again. And maybe that's the point of it. But it gets so boring. The only time, excuse me, the only time it got kind of interesting for me as I became an adult is once in a while in a priesthood meeting, which is a separate meeting for the men. The women, of course, have their own meetings, Relief Society. We can discuss whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, separating them like that. But once in a while in priesthood meeting, we'd get into some pretty deep discussions that were actually interesting. But for the most part, these talks, I had to check out. It got so freaking boring. It's like, yes, I've heard this one about, Paul, or if you're talking Book of Mormon stuff, the Nephites and the Lamanites, and I've heard it 1,000 times. I can't listen to this anymore. That was an aside. Maybe we'll do a video just on that, because talk about boring. I haven't been to a lot of church lately, but I've been a few times, for like one of my granddaughter's blessings or baptisms, and I'll go to the meeting as long as it's not a meeting near my house, because I don't want them thinking, hey, we can get him back in church. I guarantee, like my dad was just visiting, and the church is right behind our house. I said, Dad, I would go with you if it was somewhere else, but if I go in there, they're going to think they can reconvert me, and they're going to start showing up at my house again, and I don't want that. So I'm sorry, you got to go by yourself. But I have been to some meetings, and I remember my point. I look around, and when I was a member, cell phones weren't a thing. There were people that would bring toys for their kids and snacks for their kids, but there were no phones. The last couple times I've been, I see people sitting on their phones in church, just checking out, or they're zoned out. There's a lot of, every once in a while you get an interesting speaker. Like when a missionary would come home from a mission, those were usually pretty interesting, because I know mine was when I did my talk when I got home. I know I'm rambling. That's what I do. You either like this style or you don't, and if you don't, that's cool. I get it. I say it all the time. I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but when missionaries got home from their missions, this was the standard. They would get up. Most of the time it was a 2-year mission. I did a 1.5 year. That's the only reason I went, is because they changed it for a little while. But they'd get up there, and one of the first things they would say is, that was the best 2 years of my life. I got up there and said, everybody says this is the best 1.5 years, 2 years of your life. It definitely wasn't that for me. And I could see mouths fall open in church. I'm talking to a couple hundred people. I followed it up by saying, but it was one of the more interesting times in my life, and I learned a lot, and I don't regret that I went. And then I talked about some of my experiences, and I had a whole bunch of people tell me that was a really cool talk, and it was interesting, but it caught everybody off guard when I said it was not the best 1.5 years of my life. It was one of the hardest times of my life. Speaking of being a burden on your brain and stuff, when you're part of a church like that is quite demanding, and by demanding, I mean there's just a lot of rules. I'm kind of a rule follower as far as, laws. I think we have laws that are stupid and need to be changed. But if the laws are in place, let's follow them. You know, whatever we're talking about, speed limits, stealing. I mean, I'm in California right now every once in a while, and it seems like it's becoming less. You'll see a video on the news where just a bunch of people run into like a CVS or a Walgreens and just pile stuff into bags and walk out, and nobody stops them. I saw it happen at Home Depot here just a few weeks ago. Guy pushed a whole cart, a couple grand of stuff out. Somebody said, hey, he didn't pay. Nobody stopped him. So I am a rule follower. I don't think we can have a society without laws and rules. Now, there are stupid laws and stupid rules that should be changed, but we need to go about that in the right process too. So, you know, back to church and the burden on a mind, especially a younger mind. Yeah, I think it's a big deal. I think it hinders a young person's mind more than it is a benefit. Now, there are exceptions to that, obviously. If you buy all in, even as a kid, which I never completely did. I was always there. I went to church, I did what I was supposed to do. But I always had this little lingering stuff in the back of my brain. If you're all in and you think it's absolutely the true church, and I hate this saying, it's the only true church on the earth. And it's not just the Mormons that say that. There are lots of people that say that. There are people that say that and then kill people because they're not part of it. So I've never been a fan. Even when I was in the church, even when I was serving a Mormon mission, I was never a big fan of saying this is the only true church on earth. Just seems extremely arrogant. I know the Jehovah's Witnesses, I used to know a lot more about this. They have the thing, 144,000 are going to get to heaven. And the Mormons actually have a bit of a version of that, as do the Seventh-day Adventists. I'm not going to go into that here because that's not what this video is. But yeah, it weighed on my mind a lot as a kid because I was constantly aware that if I did something that was considered a sin, now I got to decide, am I going to go confess? Like I always call it confess Jesus. Am I going to go confess Jesus, or I'm just going to keep it to myself? And, I imagine it's like if you're a cheater, you're married and you cheat on your spouse. I could not stand, what was her name? She was a radio doctor. Oh, I could not stand her. Dr. Laura, was that it? I can't think, that might be it. If you know talk radio from the 80s and 90s, you probably know who I'm talking about. My dad loved her. I thought she was a nut job. Couldn't stand her. But I did hear her say one thing once, and here I'm doing a sidebar again. Somebody called in. They had cheated on their wife or their husband. I can't remember which. And they're like, I'm going to tell them. And she says, why are you telling them? And they said, because the guilt is killing me. And she said, so you're going to destroy her life to make yourself feel better. If you're telling her because for the right reason, whatever the right reason is. Anyway, that always stuck with me. I thought a cheater must carry such a burden around with them. And obviously being a kid and doing something I wasn't supposed to do in the church is not the same thing as cheating on your spouse. But it was a burden that I carried around. I'm just comparing it that way, that cheating seems like so much work. I can't even imagine. We had some really good friends once ask my wife, how can you stand your husband being on the road all the time? How do you know he's not cheating? How do you know he's not doing stuff he's not supposed to do? And her answer was something like, well, if he is, there's nothing I can do about it, and I can't sit here and worry nonstop about it. So we don't live our lives sitting and worrying about that just because, well, it's just not a thing. You're either built that way or you're not. But back to the kid thing, carrying that burden around, and most of the time I'd end up going and confessing. And like I mentioned a couple of videos ago, if it was like alcohol, it was like literally a slap on the wrist. It was just nothing. I had some comments when I did the Word of Wisdom video a little while ago about how the word of wisdom is not even implemented correctly. If you want to read the details of it, I mean, red meat is supposed to be eaten sparingly, and most Mormons I know love red meat, and I do too. I'm not judging, but those kinds of things, I felt so guilty. In high school, I partied a bit. I partook in a little here and there, and I felt guilty, but I think just because I was supposed to feel guilty. Like when I would go confess, I wasn't a sobbing mess. I would just say, I did this and this and this. And I think I was treated more harshly because I guess I wasn't remorseful enough. But I think a lot of religions put a lot of pressure on people. And I can only speak for myself and my family. I was talking to my wife the other day about this, how about, we're much happier since we left the church. And it's 20 years plus now. Sundays were our worst day. And we had people say, well, that's, because you're not doing what you're trying to do what you're supposed to do. And so the dark side is pushing against you. And when we left, we were just much happier. My mind was freer. I didn't feel the burden of, I can only look at the world this way. I can only live this way. I can only drink this or eat this or do this on Sunday. I felt a burden lift. And I don't mean to offend those of you that are active LDS. When you comment on here, I try to be respectful. My dad, I've said it 1,000 times, my mom and dad are active members. I have one brother out of seven siblings. One passed away many years ago, but there's 6 of us. There's only one that's active. There's another thing. Speaking of a burden on the mind, this was a burden on my dad's mind. When I left the church, and I have 2 brothers that were never really active, another one ended up leaving as well. So 4 of us brothers are not in the church. Only one is. And then my sister, she's got other problems, but she doesn't go to church. The church taught for the longest time that raise your kids upright and they will not go astray. So when we, in my dad's opinion, went astray, we left the truth, it hurt him and it weighed on his mind so badly. He started thinking he had to have done something wrong because the prophet said, teach them right and they will not stray. I mean, that's just crap. That is just crap. I know so many LDS families, and I know most of them are really good people that raise their kids well. I have friends that raise their kids well, that are active, and there's almost always at least one that leaves the church, if not several. So that's just crap. People are different. I've said this before. I didn't get a choice. I was not born into it, but close to born into it. And so when I was old enough to make my own decision, I made my own decision. So to put that on a parent like my dad, and I've had this talk with him. We just had this talk a couple weeks ago when he was down visiting. We were sitting in the hot tub, and I brought that up. I said, Dad, I don't know if you still feel this guilt and this burden, like you did something wrong in raising us. Try not to get emotional here. I said, Dad, you and Mom were fantastic parents. You didn't do anything wrong. And for the church to put that on you, I know you love the church, I know you believe in it, but that was wrong. And to my shock and my happiness, he agreed with me. He's like, yeah, that's just, it's just not real. People get to make their own choices, and it doesn't mean you raised your kids badly. Sorry, I took an allergy pill before this one, but man, if you don't have seasonal allergies, be thankful. I mean, there are way worse things. Don't get me wrong, I'm not bitching, but I kind of am. But I was really relieved and happy to hear that that was not a burden on his mind anymore, because it was a burden on my mind, thinking that I had caused my dad this distress this disappointment, this unhappiness, this sadness. And he still feels that, but not because of what he did. He didn't do anything wrong. My mom did nothing wrong. They were fantastic parents. They took us to church. They taught us how to be a good Mormon, and it just wasn't for me. And it didn't mean he did anything wrong. So speaking of burdens on the mind, that is so wrong. I don't know if they still teach that. If they don't, or if they do, please let me know if you're an active LDS. If they do, somebody needs to talk to whoever's saying that, because that's just bull crap. That is just crap. And I want to say BS. I want to say the whole word because it's more relevant for this discussion, but I won't. I'll refrain. So yeah, as I'm just kind of talking out loud to you right back here, first of all, thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you subscribe, if you thumbs up, if you comment, I dig it. Thank you so much. But yes, I just came to the conclusion, thank you for letting me spout off my thoughts here on camera, that yeah, it is a big burden on your mind. Now, I know there are lots of people that find happiness and joy from their religion as well. So I'm not downplaying that. I'm not saying that's not a thing. But I do feel there's too much guilt put on people, especially young people. Now, I had friends in the church, my age, really good friends, that went and did all the stuff I wasn't supposed to do. And I, for the most part, didn't do. I was a pretty good kid as far as living the church rules. I drank a little here and there. I smoked a little pot here and there. But you know, I tried to do what was right. And but I get uncomfortable talking about the other stuff, so I'm not going to. I get uncomfortable because I don't want to make anybody out there uncomfortable. I actually, if I'm sitting around talking with my friends, I have no problem with this, and you're my friends, so I should. Anyway, the sexual stuff is the stuff that they really, really put the guilt trip on you. And I remember feeling like, if I do this, I'm going to hell. I can't go on a Mormon mission. I can't do this and this. And I found out all these friends of mine were doing all this stuff. I got out on the mission, found out there were guys that confessed doing stuff like that a week before they left with their girlfriend, you know. And when I say stuff, I mean everything. And most of them got to stay. Every once in a while you'd hear about somebody getting sent home, but it always frustrated me that there was no standard. And it varied so much from ward to ward, from state to state, province to province, country to country. I've talked about this before, how some of the stuff I would hear in the Mormon Church when I was in Norway was just craziness. And I know my wife grew up in Southern California. She tells me stuff, oh yeah, they teach this and this and this. And I'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? I've never heard that before in my life. The Mormon Church doesn't teach that. So it's not the same everywhere. Yeah, I know a lot of you want to say, well, it's all the same, but it's not. I've seen it personally. My wife can attest to it, and I'm sure a bunch of you can too. Anyway, so yes, I've come to the conclusion it is a burden on your mind. That does not mean there's not benefit there. That's not what I'm saying. And some of you are going to say, well, that just proves your laziness, or you couldn't live the rules, and so you had to leave. That's not why I left. I've said this a million times. I left because I didn't believe it. It didn't work for me. I'm happier the way I live with the relationship I have with God now. And it works for me. I hope whatever you're doing works for you. So if you have kids, if you're an active LDS member and you have kids, you know, especially in their teen years and stuff, try not to put too much pressure on them. And as they become adults, if some of them leave, give yourself a little grace. You probably did a good job raising your kids. And we just make our own choices. It's not teach them right and they won't go astray. That's just a stupid saying. I can't remember who said that. I think it might have been Spencer W. Kimball, who I have a lot of respect for. He's the one that signed my papers when I went on a Mormon mission. But that's just not right. So, end of rant, if you want to call it that. I'm definitely looking forward to reading comments on this. Let me know what you think. And I appreciate it. This kind of stuff, I like talking. I'm a very social dude. I love being around people and just talking and BSing with my friends and my family, and just, I really dig it. I'm gonna go see my son in Vegas here in about a week and a half. He moved there a couple months ago. I'm excited to see his new place and to visit him. I miss him. He's like one of my best buddies. We golf all the time. So I miss having him around, even though I'm gone a lot myself. But thanks for watching. Tack för denna gång. Vi snackas igen snart. Norge för alltid. Go Norway. Kick ass in the World Cup. I grew up playing soccer. I loved playing soccer. I'm not a huge fan of watching it, except World Cup. I will watch Canada, the US, and Norway. Is Canada even in it? I know the US won their first game against Paraguay, I think 4-1. And Norway won today, so go Norway. We'll talk to you all soon. Be nice to everybody. Peace. Love.